Hi everybody, welcome back. In the last video we looked at our definitions for those who are employed, unemployed, not in the labor force, did our formulas. So actually I'll just pull this up here because we're going to be using those in this video. So we have the labor force, the adult population, and then our three statistics to measure labor market health: the unemployment rate, labor force participation rate, and the employment population ratio. So we covered all that in the last video. Go check that out if you haven't. And now we're going to apply that here to actually calculate some labor market statistics, in this case going back to July of 2019. So there are the numbers, and what I'm actually, if you want to pause the video and try to calculate these yourself, go ahead and do so. And otherwise, come back and we're gonna calculate those right now. Okay, so again, the labor force is just employed plus unemployed. I'll just abbreviate there. So that's going to be the 157 million people, 0.29, plus the unemployed is 6 million, for a total of 163 million, 163.35 million people in the labor force. Now that we have the labor force, we can actually calculate the unemployment rate. Again, that's the unemployed divided by the labor force. So that's our 6.06 divided by 163.35, our new calculation of the labor force. And that's going to come out to 0.0371 or 3.71%. Okay, so 3% is actually quite a low unemployment. We'll talk later in probably the next video about what unemployment rates are, quote unquote good, and kind of the why we don't expect unemployment rates ever to go down to zero. But 3.7% is a really nice, robust unemployment rate, sign of a very healthy labor market, which we had back in 2019. Okay, unemployment rate, check. Let's go ahead and calculate the adult population because we need that for the next two. And that is going to be the labor force plus those not in the labor force. So labor force is here, not in the labor force is 95.87. So we have 163.35 plus 95.87, and that's going to give us a total of 259.22 million people in the United States above the age of 16 back in July 2019. So United States at the time, probably somewhere around 330 million people would be my guess. So, that the rest from 260 up to 330, the rest of those would be considered children and young teens. Okay, so we have our adult population, about 260 million, and now we can calculate labor force participation rate. Remember, that one is going to be the labor force divided by the population. So the labor force we calculated up above as 163.35 million over our new population calculation for a total of 63.02%. Or it'll initially come out as 0.6302. That's 63%. Okay, and then our employment population ratio. So again, employment divided by the population. The number employed was 157.29 million over 259.22 million population for a total of 60.68%. That means 60% or 3/5 of the population, adult population, had a job. Okay, and a little bit more than 3/5 of the population either had a job or was looking for a job. Okay, and so actually, if you notice, the 3.71 is about what we'd have extra once we add that population in there. Okay, so that's how we calculate those statistics. And just to kind of show you where we've come and why these other, in addition to the unemployment rate, these other two labor market statistics are very important. I want to show you going from the before the Great Recession, the peak, to the trough, and then into recent history, how each of these labor market statistics have compared. Okay, so starting with the unemployment rate in December, and well, let me actually scroll up real quick, just show you. So December of 2007, we were at very low unemployment rates. So that's the peak. That's like the top of GDP before GDP started to fall. And then the bottom of GDP and then back up. So the peak of the expansion before the recession, December 2007. And then we go to the trough of the recession where GDP was the lowest. And then we move on to the current day. But this is kind of the area where we're going to be looking at, actually 2019 out here. Okay. So if we look at first the unemployment rate, right before the recession started, we were at 5%. And then the recession hit and it got as bad as 9.5%, which historically has been quite high. And then as we just calculated above, we got down to 3.7% in July of 2019. We got as low as 3.5% a little bit later. So what does this tell us about the labor market? Or what does this tell us about the labor market recovery? And so from the first one, it looks great. It looks great. So we had low unemployment. It ticked way up, but then it recovered and even got lower than where we started. So that's good. For unemployment rates, we want low unemployment rates. For labor force participation and for the employment population ratio, we want those numbers to be higher because this means more people are working or trying to work, and this means more people are working. So let's see how those compared from that Great Recession. So labor force participation rate before the recession started was 66%. As we would expect, when there was a recession, some people dropped out of the labor force. So it went down to 65.7%. And then throughout the decade, the 2010s, we actually didn't see a recovery. It went down to 63.0%. So actually, it's worse than before the recession. Okay, and then finally, employment population ratio was 62.7. During the recession, it got worse. It went down to 59.4. And it did recover a bit, back up to 60.7%. But it still didn't recover fully back to where it was before the recession started. So slight improvement, but did not hit pre-Great Recession levels. Okay, and then I'll have a separate video. So this is just to give you the idea about what these are and what they look like, and then I'll actually have a separate video that will show more specific details related to the labor market of today. Okay, but that's an idea from what was before COVID, the most severe recession we've had in decades. Okay, so basically, part of the message here is that it can sometimes look, if you look at something like only the unemployment rate, it can look like the labor market has recovered very well. And in this case, it looks like it did. But if you look at the other two statistics, it's not quite as rosy a picture. And yes, in one case, the employment population ratio, we recovered a bit from the Great Recession, but we still didn't meet those pre-recession levels. And then the labor force participation rate is even worse. So it's really important not just to look at the unemployment rate, but also these other labor market statistics. Okay, now just to kind of, before we go on to these cyclical and frictional and all of those unemployment topics, I want to do one more example just to show you how these three different unemployment statistics can change depending on the health of the labor market and the specifics about who's being hired, who's trying to work, who's not trying to work. So we're going to use just a stylized example here. We're going to have some people who are unemployed. We're going to have some people who are employed. We'll have the labor force. We'll have those not in the labor force. And then we'll have the adult population, 16 plus. We're going to have a scenario A and a scenario B. And with that, we're going to calculate some unemployment statistics. So this one's going to be for A. And we'll do it for B as well. But let's go ahead and start with A. So let's suppose we have 40 people or 40 million people or whatever unemployed. 80 are employed. That means the labor force, which is unemployed plus employed, is just the sum of those for 120. Let's suppose that those not in the labor force are 30. We add these together to get an adult population of 150. Okay, so let's calculate the unemployment rate. That's unemployed, 40, divided by the labor force, 120. 33, let's just do 33.3%, 3333%. Okay, let's do the labor force participation rate. That is the labor force, 120, divided by the adult population, 150, for a total of 80%. And then the employment population ratio, which are the employed, 80, divided by the population, 150, for 53.3333%. Okay, So that's our baseline. That's where we're starting. But I want to come back to this concept we talked about in the first video, the previous video, for scenario B, where we have now 10 discouraged workers. And remember, discouraged workers are people who they were looking for a job, or they were even working, but then they were laid off or they quit. Actually, they didn't quit. These are people who were looking for a job, but were unable to find a suitable work. So either from a lack of demand from the employers or a lack of skills that employers need. So 10 people who were looking for work have dropped out. So we're down to 30. That's minus 10 discouraged workers. So we've moved from 40 people who were looking for work, they stopped. We're going to assume that the number of employed stays the same, but now our labor force changes because 30 plus 80 is now 110. And those 10 extra workers are now not in the labor force. So that's plus 10. And our adult population is still the same. And just as a side note, another reason that these statistics could change are just through changing demographics, right? If people have more or less children, there will be more or less 16-year-olds. The other thing is that as people retire, and we have an aging population in the United States and several other countries around the world, those not in the labor force, that number is also going to be growing with a larger population. Just a side note there. Okay, so anyway, let's now take our new numbers and calculate the same things. So the unemployment rate now becomes 30 divided by 110. And so what do we have here? That becomes 27.27 repeating percent. And so we've moved from 33% unemployment down to 27. So if we're only looking at the unemployment rate, it looks like, wow, the labor market has really improved. Unemployment rate went down by over 6%. What a healthy economy we have. But that's precisely the opposite conclusion that we should have, because the economy is so bad that 10 people or 10 million people or whatever have given up looking for work because the economy, the labor market is so bad. So by looking only at the unemployment rate, we can get a really misshapen idea of what's actually happening. So that's why, again, bringing these other two statistics into the fold are actually really important. So the labor force participation rate is now a smaller labor force divided by the same sized population. That's going to bring us down to 73.3%. So in this case, we've actually decreased our labor force participation rate, and that's a much more accurate depiction of a weaker labor market. And then finally, the employment population ratio, which is still 80 divided by 150 for no change. Okay, and so basically, if we see that employment population ratio is the same or it hasn't changed much, then by looking at these two statistics, we can see, oh, here unemployment has gone down, but labor force participation rate has also gone down by quite a bit. So actually, this decrease in the unemployment rate is probably reflective of some type of discouraged workers or possibly changing demographics through an aging population. But in this case, it's discouraged workers. Okay, so again, just wanted to show an extra small example there about why we should care about more than just the unemployment rate, and it's primarily for this reason here. But hopefully getting a little practice in making those calculations was helpful. In the next video, we're going to dive into thinking about, as we talked about in the first video, how unemployment has a relationship with GDP. It's a counter-cyclical relationship. So we'll look at this. We'll look at cyclical unemployment, frictional unemployment, and things, natural rate of unemployment, and other things like that. Okay, so that's going to be it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.